After 17 years of marriage, my wife cheated and my daughter covered for her. Mom deserves true love, not some guy with old junk, she defended. I lost them both, or at least, that's what they thought. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit. I hit my 40s thinking I had a solid life, a good business, a good marriage, and a daughter I raised for 15 years. Then in 1 week, it all shattered. Not just because my wife cheated, not just because my daughter defended it. It goes deeper than that. Here's how 17 years of marriage had shattered. I, 42 male, own an antique shop in Amarillo, built from nothing after spending years working as an appraiser for another dealer. 20 years of 70-hour weeks, grinding through recessions and watching competitors fold while I expanded. The shop specializes in authenticated Wild West memorabilia and Civil War artifacts. Nothing flashy, but profitable enough that I've got 3 employees now, and a reputation that brings in collectors from across the country. I met my wife, 38 female, Andrea, when I was 24, and married after 1 year. She was stunning back then, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. I was just starting out, living in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house I'd bought with an inheritance from my grandfather. My dad, who'd seen 3 of his friends get financially destroyed in divorces, insisted I get a prenup. Son, a man protects his assets before he needs to, not after. Andrea agreed. We eventually compromised. The prenup stated what I brought into the marriage stayed mine, including the house and business, but anything we built together during the marriage would be split 50-50. Fair enough, I thought. That inheritance from my grandfather wasn't just money. It was the culmination of his life's work, and I wasn't about to gamble it away. For 17 years, we had what I thought was solid. Andrea worked her way up to manager at a high-end cosmetics counter. I expanded the business, bought a bigger house in a better neighborhood, took her on vacations to the places she'd always wanted to see. We hit Cabo, Hawaii, even spent 2 weeks in Italy for our 10th anniversary. We had our routines: Sunday brunches, Christmas traditions, summer barbecues with the neighbors. We had a good group of friends, most of them other couples we'd known since our 20s. There were signs, but I was too busy building our life to notice them. I'd catch her staring at her phone with a slight smile, only to quickly lock the screen when I walked in. Noticed how she'd step away to take certain calls, how she'd dress up for what she called networking events, but come home without a single business card. Yeah, I missed the signs because I didn't want to see them. Classic mistake. Our daughter Chloe arrived 2 years after we got married. Always thought she looked more like Andrea, but kids are weird like that sometimes. Genetics can skip around. Never questioned it, because why would I? Raised her like any father would. Taught her to ride a bike, helped with homework, showed her how to appraise antiques, took her camping in the Palo Duro Canyon every summer. We were close when she was younger. She'd hang around the shop after school, learning how to spot fakes and tell the difference between Civil War and Spanish-American War equipment. We had a good relationship. By age 10, she could spot a reproduction cavalry saber at 20 paces. I'd test her with mixed batches of authentic and fake artifacts, and she'd nail the assessment 9 times out of 10. The patina's wrong, she'd say, or look at the stamping, too clean for something from 1863. I was proud as hell. Around when Chloe turned 14, things started to change. She developed an attitude I chalked up to normal teenage rebellion. One Saturday, I asked her to help at the shop during a busy antique fair weekend. She rolled her eyes and said, "Why would I waste my weekend with your boring old junk when no one at school even cares about that stuff?" Andrea jumped to her defense, saying I was being too demanding and teenagers needed space. I backed off, figuring it was just a phase. Things escalated when Chloe turned 15. I caught her showing her friends my prized Winchester rifle that I kept locked in the study. When I confronted her about unauthorized access to the gun cabinet, she snapped, "It's just show and tell." God, you're so uptight about everything. Andrea stepped in, telling me I was overreacting. She wasn't going to hurt anyone. Stop making everything a federal case. What Andrea didn't grasp was that this wasn't about teenage rebellion. It was about respect for historically significant items worth tens of thousands. That Winchester wasn't just a gun, it was a documented piece used in the Johnson County War, with provenance I'd spent years verifying. But try explaining that to a wife who sees your passion as old junk. The distance between Chloe and me grew wider by the month. She started missing our weekend breakfasts, a tradition we'd had since she was 6. One Sunday, I knocked on her door at 9 a.m., our usual time. "Breakfast is ready," I called through the door. "Not hungry," she mumbled from under the covers. "Come on, I made your favorite pancakes." She emerged, glaring at me with contempt. "Can you just stop? I don't want your pancakes. I'm not a little kid anymore." Later that day, I overheard Andrea consoling her. "Your dad just doesn't understand you're growing up. He still thinks you're his little girl." They didn't know I was standing in the hallway. Chloe's response cut deep. "He's so boring, Mom. All he does is work and talk about stupid old junk nobody cares about." Another time, Chloe and I were supposed to go to an authentication seminar in Dallas, something she'd been excited about the year before. The morning we were set to leave, she refused to get out of bed. When I finally got her up, she snapped, "I don't care about your stupid cowboy crap anymore. It's embarrassing." Andrea pulled me aside and told me to stop pushing my interest on our daughter. "She's developing her own identity," she said. "You need to accept that she's not your mini-me." Again, I backed off. Then the girl trips to Houston started in February. 3 weekends in 2 months. Each time Andrea would come back with a shopping bag from Neiman Marcus, but nothing inside worth what the credit card statement showed. The receipts I found in her purse were for lunch for one, not the group brunches with her college friends, she described in such detail. I started noticing other things too. She started taking calls in another room, updated her wardrobe with clothes that never seemed to make an appearance when we went out together. These are classic signs. I know that now. But at the time, I kept making excuses. We'd been married 17 years. We had a life together, a daughter, a home. People don't just throw that away, right? Then Mike, my assistant manager, finally confirmed what I was starting to suspect. "Saw your wife at Cattleman's yesterday with some suit," he said casually, while we unpacked a shipment of Frontier-era medical tools. Seemed pretty friendly. I kept my face neutral despite the knot forming in my gut. "Houston trip got canceled," I lied. That night, I checked our joint credit card statement. There it was. Cattleman's Steakhouse, $163.42, too expensive for lunch, too intimate for business. I also noticed charges at a hotel in Amarillo, not the kind of place you stay unless you're trying to keep a low profile, and frequent charges at a gas station off Interstate 40, halfway between Amarillo and Dallas. Then something in my brain kicked in. If Andrea was cheating, there'd be digital breadcrumbs. She wasn't tech-savvy enough to cover her tracks well. When I got home that evening, Chloe was on the couch texting furiously. She barely acknowledged me, but I caught a glimpse of her phone as a notification popped up. The banner read, "Paul, can't wait to see you guys next weekend." The message disappeared before I could read more. When she realized I was looking, she flipped the phone over and glared at me. "What?" she snapped. "Who's Paul?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Her face flushed. "Just Mom's friend. From work. Why are you snooping?" I wasn't. Whatever. She got up and stomped to her room, slamming the door behind her. That interaction told me everything I needed to know. Suddenly, a lot of things just clicked. I didn't confront Andrea when she got home. Something told me to wait, to gather more information. Instead, I hugged her and listened to her elaborate lies about spa treatments and shopping with friends who didn't exist. That night, with Chloe at a sleepover and the house empty, I sat down at Andrea's desk. I remembered setting up her original Facebook account years ago when she wasn't tech-savvy. She'd since switched to a new account with her work email, probably thinking I'd forgotten about the old one. I hadn't. After requesting a password reset through the email I still had access to, I was in. It didn't take long to find the guy, Paul. He's a commercial real estate agent from Dallas, according to his profile. The messages went back 11 months. Hundreds of them. Not just casual flirting, but detailed plans, intimate conversations, declarations of love. I felt sick reading through them, but I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. My marriage, my life, everything I thought I knew, burning before my eyes. "I've never stopped loving you, Paul. You know you've always been my true love. Aaron's a good provider, but we never had the passion we did. I settled because I thought you weren't coming back. That stopped me cold." Always been? When? For how long? I was still processing as I scrolled further. The damning messages stopped me again. "Andrea, what if she's yours?" "Paul, that's impossible. The timing doesn't work out, I think." My hands were shaking. I almost dropped the laptop. According to their messages, Andrea and Paul had dated in college. He broke things off to take a job in California. 2 months later, she met me. But apparently, Paul came back briefly before moving west, and they had a goodbye weekend after she and I had already started dating. The timeline matched up with when Andrea got pregnant. I closed the laptop, mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about my life was crashing down around me, but I wasn't going to act on emotion. That's how men make mistakes that cost them everything. Instead, I methodically took screenshots of the most damning messages, saved copies to a secure cloud drive only I could access. Then I cleared the browser history and put the laptop back exactly as I'd found it. Andrea might suspect I knew something, but she'd have no proof I'd accessed her accounts. By morning, I had a plan. First stop, Josh's office. He'd handled my prenup 17 years ago and had become something of a friend over the years. We'd grab drinks occasionally, talk business. He was older now, gray at the temples, but his mind was still sharp. I need to see if that prenup is still valid, I told him, after settling into the chair across from his desk. And I need a paternity test, court admissible. Josh's smile vanished. I showed him the screenshots. The prenup should hold up, he confirmed after reviewing the document. You purchased the house before marriage, and your business was explicitly protected. Any assets acquired through the business remain yours. But the second home in the hill country that you bought 5 years ago, that would likely be considered marital property since you purchased it while married, regardless of whose name is on the deed. Same goes for the rental property downtown. I'd forgotten about those. The vacation house had been Andrea's idea, but I'd paid for it mostly through business profits. The downtown property was an investment opportunity that had nearly doubled in value. And the paternity test? I'll set it up. If the child isn't yours, things get complicated. She's 15 now, so we're talking about only 2 years of potential child support at most. But more importantly, after raising her for 15 years, Texas courts will likely consider you her legal father regardless of biology. The doctrine of paternity by estoppel could apply here. So even if she's not mine, I'm still on the hook. Possibly. But let's get the test first, then strategize. Josh filed a petition with the court requesting a paternity test based on fraud and newly discovered evidence. The judge granted a temporary order authorizing the test for legal purposes. Since Chloe was still a minor and under my legal guardianship, the court order allowed me to collect the sample without her consent, as long as it was non-invasive and documented. I scheduled the test at the lab Josh had arranged. Since Andrea wouldn't cooperate, the judge's temporary order allowed for discreet collection without her consent, as long as it was non-invasive and documented. I waited until Chloe fell asleep and used the court-issued swab kit carefully, following the lab's handling instructions to the letter. The next morning, I delivered the sealed sample to the lab. Those 2 weeks of waiting were the longest of my life. I maintained normalcy on the outside while strategizing inside. I documented every asset, photographed every item in the house that predated the marriage, checked the deed to ensure it was still solely in my name. I went through 17 years of financial records, found that I'd paid for 83% of household expenses despite Andrea's steady income, documented how her spending had increased substantially in the last year. Designer clothes, spa treatments, weekend getaways that were actually rendezvous with Paul. Cataloged the jewelry I'd bought her over the years, about $22,000 worth that would be considered gifts and therefore hers to keep. Before filing, Josh advised I move half of our joint account into a separate, transparent bank account under my name, but only after he served formal notice to Andrea's lawyer. Full disclosure ensured I stayed compliant with Texas law and avoided accusations of hiding assets. I had to be methodical. I needed to show that Andrea wasn't just unfaithful, but actively deceptive about our daughter's paternity and our financial situation. Our longtime family accountant, Marcus, helped me trace Andrea's spending over the last year. Turned out she'd blown through nearly $30,000 at luxury hotels in Dallas and Houston. Hotels I'd never stayed at with her. Marcus gave me a long look. You need me to testify about any of this? He offered. I nodded. Another ally in my corner. The call came on a Friday. I was authenticating a set of Texas Ranger badges when Josh's number flashed on my phone. We have the results, Aaron. You're not the biological father. Even though I'd suspected it, the confirmation felt like taking a shotgun blast to the chest. 15 years of memories. Chloe's first steps, teaching her to ride a bike, building her science fair projects, suddenly had a shadow cast over them. I sat down in my office chair, trying to process what this meant. What now? I managed to ask. I need you to think carefully. Challenging paternity after all these years is complicated. The courts generally prioritize the child's stability. I need time to process this, I told him. Let's focus on the divorce for now. Because here's the thing. Despite everything, I still loved Chloe. She wasn't just some random kid I'd been tricked into raising. She was the girl who'd fallen asleep on my chest. Teenage attitude aside, she was still my daughter in every way that mattered. But I also knew that if Andrea had lied about this, she'd been poisoning Chloe against me for years. Those teenage phases suddenly looked a lot more calculated. I hadn't confronted Andrea yet. But the process server delivered divorce papers to her at work on Monday morning. Maximum public impact. I made sure I was home when she returned, sitting calmly at the kitchen table with copies of everything laid out. She burst through the door like a Category 5 hurricane, face twisted with rage, designer purse swinging wildly as she slammed the papers down. What the hell is this? Are you insane? No, Andrea. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. I slid my phone across the table. The Facebook messages were open. Your words, not mine. And these, I placed the DNA test results next to the phone. Paternity test doesn't lie, even when wives do. Her face went pale as she scanned the results. UTF. No way. This is illegal. You can't test our daughter without consent. My lawyer assures me the test is admissible. And she's not my daughter, Andrea? You thought I'd never find out? She collapsed into a chair. Aaron, I know how this looks, but Paul and I, it was a stupid mistake. He doesn't mean anything to me now. It was just, he's your true love, remember? I was just the reliable backup plan. And Chloe, were you ever going to tell me? Or was I just a convenient father figure? Her expression changed. Drop the act. What do you expect? You spend all your time with dusty junk while I'm stuck in this nowhere town. Paul has ambition. He's going places. You're just a small-town shop owner, selling other people's history because you can't make your own. At least he knows how to make a woman feel wanted. 17 years, Andrea. I gave you stability, a home, comfort, raised a child that isn't mine. And this is your defense? Mocking the business that paid for your freaking BMW and your designer wardrobe? The business that funded those trips where you were screwing your college boyfriend? I could have had so much more, she hissed. But I settled. Just then, Chloe walked in from school. She stopped short, seeing us at the table with papers spread out. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. Your mom can explain, I said quietly. Ask her about Paul. Chloe's eyes widened slightly, but she composed herself quickly. Oh, what about him? I saw the text, Chloe. You already know about him, don't you? She nodded, chin raised defiantly. When you were snooping, you mean? Well, yeah, I know. He's mom's first love. Not like you'd understand what that means. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Andrea moved to stand beside Chloe, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Mom deserves someone who actually gave her time, Chloe continued, her voice gaining confidence. Someone who cared about her dreams instead of just old people's junk. Paul actually listens to her. He takes her places. All you do is work. I stared at my daughter, the girl I'd raised, the teenager who was now a stranger to me. A cold clarity washed over me, and I felt oddly calm. All right, I said quietly. Paul should be more convenient now, since he's your real father. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's face went from smug to confused to horrified in the span of seconds. What did you just say? She whispered. DNA doesn't lie, I said, sliding the test results toward her. Congratulations! You've been reunited with your biological father. Isn't that what you wanted? The real deal instead of the boring stand-in? Chloe grabbed the papers with shaking hands. Her eyes darted across the results. Scientific terms she didn't understand, but the conclusion was clear enough. She turned to Andrea, color draining from her face. Mom? What is this? What does this mean? Andrea reached for her. Chloe, baby, I can explain. You told me he was just your old boyfriend. You never said... She backed away from both of us, papers clutched to her chest, eyes wild. Have you been lying to me my whole life? I stood up, gathering my keys and wallet. Neither of them deserved to see how much this was tearing me apart. I'll be at Tom's tonight. You two have a lot to talk about. As I walked out the door, the screaming started. Chloe's voice rising in accusation, Andrea's desperate attempts to explain. I closed the door on 17 years of lies and drove away, their voices fading behind me. Over the next 3 months, I systematically detached Andrea and Chloe from my life, financially, legally, and emotionally. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this was easy. First, I secured my business, moved the most valuable inventory to a secure storage facility registered under my LLC, updated all passwords and account access, removed Andrea as an authorized user on business credit cards. Nothing illegal, just protecting assets during a contentious divorce. At home, I documented everything meticulously, photographed every room, noted every item of value and when it was acquired, created a spreadsheet detailing household expenses for the past 5 years, showing I'd paid roughly 80% despite our similar incomes. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and retirement accounts to my brother, updated my will to explicitly exclude Andrea and Chloe, had my lawyer draft power of attorney documents giving my brother control if I became incapacitated. The divorce proceedings moved slowly. We were required to attend mediation before a trial date would be set. Andrea hired a notorious divorce attorney known for bleeding men dry in court. Josh just smiled when I told him. The prenup makes most of her playbook useless, he said. Andrea tried fishing for information through mutual friends, attempting to gauge how much I knew and how far I'd go. I kept my cards close to my chest, revealing nothing. When friends asked what was happening, I simply said, Andrea and I are separating. I'd rather not discuss the details. Let her spread whatever lies she wanted. The court would see the evidence. The paternity issue complicated things further. Since I'd been on Chloe's birth certificate and had acted as her father all these years, legally challenging paternity now was an uphill battle. Texas typically has a 4-year statute of limitations on contesting paternity, but my lawyer found an exception for cases involving fraud. Still, the courts were unlikely to completely sever the legal relationship. In the end, my status as Chloe's legal father remained intact, but with an important stipulation. Since she was already 15, and given the circumstances of the deception, my child support obligations were minimal, covering only basic necessities until she turned 18. No college fund, no car, no extras. 3 weeks into the proceedings, I had my first and only face-to-face with Paul. It happened in the parking lot outside the lawyer's office after a particularly tense mediation session. He was waiting by Andrea's car, tall, tanned, with the polished look of a man who prioritized appearance over substance. Aaron, he called as I walked to my truck. Got a minute? The freaking nerve of this guy. He approached anyway, extending his hand. I ignored it. Look, man, I know this is awkward, but I want you to know I never meant for any of this to happen. Oh yeah? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. The situation got complicated. Andrea and I reconnected, and I'm not interested in any of the BS you're going to say. I cut him off. I raised Chloe while you what? Waited in the wings? I didn't know about Chloe until recently, he said quickly. But I want to step up, do the right thing. I laughed, couldn't help it. The right thing would have been not sleeping with another man's wife. But sure, play dad now that the hard part's done. Andrea, Chloe, and me. We can be civil about this. It was taking every bit of patience in me not to rearrange his face until I shoved him against the wall. Let me be clear, you're welcome to them both. But don't mistake my calm for acceptance. You're a piece of shit who helped waste years of my life, and there's no version of this where we shake hands and move on. Do you understand? Now get the hell out of here before I make sure you end up with some broken ribs. He froze there. I walked away before I could do something I'd regret. I drove back to work. I had a business to run and a life to rebuild. We finally reached a settlement agreement after 4 months of legal wrangling. The prenup protected my business and primary residence completely. Andrea got her portion of our joint savings, her car, her own retirement accounts, and her legal share of equity in the vacation house and rental property we'd purchased during the marriage. I kept the primary residence, the business, my truck, and my personal retirement accounts. I also agreed to buy out her shares of the 2 investment properties, which cost me a significant chunk of my liquid assets, but kept the properties under my control. It wasn't the clean win I wanted, but for Texas community property law, it was a solid outcome. I kept what mattered and walked away with peace of mind. That was more than enough. The day after the divorce was finalized, Andrea and Chloe moved out. Not to an apartment as I'd expected, but straight to Dallas, to live with Paul. Apparently, while our divorce was processing, he'd been setting up their perfect life together, promising Andrea a fresh start away from Amarillo. Chloe left without saying goodbye, just packed her things while I was at the shop and disappeared from my life as completely as if she'd never been part of it. You know what's strange? The relief. After months of tension, lies, and legal battles, the silence in the house felt almost sacred. I walked from room to room that first night, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. With Andrea and Chloe gone, I rebuilt my life with methodical precision. I remodeled the house, changing the things Andrea had always insisted on, painted the living room the deep blue she'd vetoed, replaced the formal dining setup with a pool table, converted her meditation room into a proper home office. The house started feeling like mine again, a space where I could breathe. I installed a vintage Wild West saloon bar in the den, complete with an authentic bar back from a defunct Nevada casino. Hung up the antique weapons collection Andrea had always insisted stay hidden in cases. Bought a state-of-the-art sound system and played my music as loud as I wanted, whenever I wanted. Small freedoms, but they felt revolutionary. The business thrived without the constant drain of Andrea's spending. I expanded online, hired a digital marketing specialist, and started attending major antique shows across the Southwest. Profits increased 24% in 6 months. My brother came to stay for a few weeks, helped with a remodel, made sure I was eating right and not drinking too much. Josh and I became actual friends, meeting weekly for poker nights with other divorced guys who'd survived similar situations. My neighbor Dave, a retired cop whose wife had left him years earlier, became an unexpected source of wisdom. There was no contact from either Andrea or Chloe. I heard through mutual friends that they were settling into life in Dallas, and that Paul had gotten Andrea a job at his real estate firm. Chloe had apparently transferred to a private school where she was thriving. I didn't ask for updates after that. Some wounds heal better without picking at them. Almost exactly 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I was at the shop appraising a collection of Confederate currency when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, customer service smile ready. It died when I saw Andrea and Chloe standing there. Andrea looked different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by discount store business casual. And she'd lost the artificial polish that had been her armor for so long. Chloe stood slightly behind her mother, eyes downcast. She'd lost weight, and there was a hardness to her face that hadn't been there before. She looked older than 16. Aaron, Andrea started, stepping forward. Please, can we talk? I set down the currency I'd been examining. I'm with customers right now. It'll just take a minute, she pressed. We've made a terrible mistake. Paul was not my problem, I cut her off, gesturing to an elderly couple browsing Civil War sabers. The shop closes at 6. Please, Chloe spoke for the first time, her voice small. Dad, the word hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard it in a year, hadn't expected to ever hear it again. 6 o'clock, I repeated, turning back to my work. Andrea, you can wait outside. What? Andrea's voice rose. I'm not leaving my daughter. You are if you want me to talk to her. You wait outside or in your car, those are the terms. After a moment's tense silence, Andrea nodded stiffly and walked out. Chloe hovered uncertainly by the door. You can stay, I told her. Look around if you want. We close at 6. For the next 2 hours, I worked while keeping one eye on Chloe. She wandered the store, occasionally touching items she'd once helped me catalog. The elderly couple left. 2 more customers came and went. At 6, I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Let's take a walk, I told Chloe. There's a park down the street. We walked in silence, the evening air warm against our skin. I noticed Andrea watching from her car across the street, but didn't acknowledge her. At the park, we sat on a bench under a sprawling oak tree. Chloe twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Paul left us, she finally said. 3 months ago. He cleaned out Mom's bank account and disappeared. Once we moved in, we saw his true colors. The act dropped fast. Said he never signed up for a teenage daughter or a clingy ex. She continued. We later found out he'd maxed out his credit cards and had another girlfriend in Houston with a kid of her own. I said nothing, watching a pair of cardinals flit between branches above us. We had to sell the condo, she continued when I didn't respond. Mom can't afford the rent on the apartment we're in now. She's working 2 jobs. We've been staying with her friend in Fort Worth, but that's ending soon. Still, I waited. There was more coming. That's one thing about negotiations. Whether it's for an antique Colt revolver or in a conversation like this, you always let the other party lay out their position fully before responding. I lost my spot at the private school, she admitted. We couldn't afford the tuition. The public school in our district it's not great. I've fallen behind. The school thing hit me harder than I expected. Education had always been a priority for me. I'd set aside money for Chloe's college fund since she was a baby. I'd put it in a 529 plan years ago, with me as the sole custodian. Andrea couldn't touch it, per the divorce agreement. Finally, I looked at her. Why are you telling me this, Chloe? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I made a horrible mistake. We both did. Mom told me all these stories about Paul, how romantic he was, how he was her first real love. She made it sound like you were the villain, keeping her trapped in a boring life. And I believed her because it was easier than admitting my mom was a liar. I didn't know he wasn't my dad until you showed me those test results. Mom never told me that part. And now I know what I threw away, she whispered. I had a dad who loved me, who taught me things, who was always there even when I was awful to him. And I threw it away for some fantasy Mom created. She broke then, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. On instinct, I reached out and put my arm around her. She collapsed against me, crying in earnest now. I'm so sorry, she choked out between sobs. I held her while she cried, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. When she finally quieted, I spoke. I can't undo the past year, Chloe. I can't pretend it didn't happen. What you and your mother did, it cut deep. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. But you're still my kid, I continued, the words coming easier than I expected. I spent months shutting down that part of myself, but seeing you now, DNA doesn't change 15 years. I know what's real and what matters. Hope flickered in her eyes. Really? Really. But I have conditions. You finish high school, no excuses, no dropping out. You get a part-time job to save for college, and you deal with me directly, not through Andrea. We'll also sit down with Josh to put some things in writing, so we're both clear. I knew I needed legal protection. The father in me knew Chloe needed structure. What about Mom? She asked hesitantly. She needs help too. That bridge is burned, Chloe. Andrea's an adult who made her choices. I'll help you, but she's on her own. Chloe looked across the street to where Andrea sat watching us from her car. She seemed to understand. Okay, she agreed quietly. I can live with that. We walked back toward the shop together, steps lighter than when we'd left. At the corner, I stopped. You need to go tell your mom my terms. If you want to come back to Amarillo, if you want my help, she stays out of my life. Period. Chloe nodded. I understand. I watched her cross the street to Andrea's car, watched the animated conversation through the windshield, Andrea's expressions shifting from hope to anger to resignation. After a few minutes, Chloe got out and walked back to me. She agrees, she said simply. The following week, Josh filed a custody modification to reflect the new living arrangement. Andrea didn't contest it, probably relieved to have one less problem to deal with. The judge signed off quickly. Chloe was old enough to speak for herself, and she wanted to live with me. Andrea retained visitation rights, but from what I could tell, they rarely used them. Good. You can stay in the guest room until we figure out something more permanent. I'll help you enroll back in your old school next week. She wasn't the same girl who'd left a year ago. Too much had happened for that. But maybe she could be someone new, someone stronger forged from the wreckage of her mother's lies. That night, as I showed her to the guest room, she paused in the doorway. Thank you, she said softly, for giving me another chance. Make it count. We fell into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Not easy, not perfect, but steady. I set clear expectations. Home by 9 p.m. on school nights, maintaining at least a B average, contributing to household chores. She found a part-time job at a bookstore near her school, working weekends and some afternoons. For her 18th birthday, I helped her set up a modest investment account. By the time she graduated high school, she'd saved enough from her job to buy a decent used car. I matched her savings as a graduation gift, not because I had to, but because I wanted to acknowledge her effort. She enrolled in community college for the first 2 years, planning to transfer to a state university to finish her business degree. So that's my story, not one I ever expected to tell. Turns out the foundations of my life were built on quicksand, but now I'm standing on bedrock. The shop is expanding to a second location in Santa Fe next month. The house feels like mine again. My relationship with Chloe is different, more guarded in some ways, more honest in others, but it's real. Andrea remains firmly out of my new life. She calls Chloe occasionally, meets her for lunch once a month, but respects the distance I've established. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the woman I married in the stories Chloe shares, but those moments just remind me how far we've all come. Here's what I've learned. A man builds his life on what he believes to be true. When those truths crumble, he has two choices. Crumble with them or build something stronger on firmer ground. It's the understanding that I am the architect of my own happiness, and sometimes the strongest structures rise from the ashes of what once was.